we actually believe that these abnormal proteins in our gut have a pathway from the vagus nerve to the brain. So early gut symptoms, severe constipation and other GI issues in Parkinson's, such as bloating, they can actually develop well before we develop tremors. That could be, again, a signaling between the link between the gut and the brain. Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about something unique about Parkinson's. And when most people think about Parkinson's disease, they think of tremors, stiffness, and slowness. But what if I told you that for many people, the first sign of Parkinson's may actually start in the gut? So today's episode, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and fast evolving areas of neuroscience, the connection between the gut and the brain. We'll talk about the early warning signs of like constipation, the role of the vagus nerve, the misfolding of alpha-synuclein, and the potential future of gut-based diagnostics or prevention. If you've ever wondered whether what happens with your digestive system could impact your brain, you're at the right place. So Ibre, you ready to start? Let's dive in.
Yes, absolutely. This is such an interesting topic, Dr. Thakkar. We usually think of Parkinson's as a brain disease, but lately researchers are looking at the gut. What triggered that shift in thinking?
So we'll look at different aspects, but the key triggers for that shift of thinking is, number one, when we talk about alpha-synuclein, which is a normal protein that also then misfolds and becomes abnormal, it's actually in the gut. So we think of alpha-synuclein, again, as a product of normal stability of proteins that help with nerve signals. But when it's abnormal and it changes, then it becomes like a cancer cell and it spreads from one cell to another cell, and then it spreads from the gut tissue. And within the gut, it actually is all within the enteric nervous system. So our nerves of our gut lining, in our intestines, around the stomach, they actually have this abnormal protein that becomes misfolded, and it then sends and triggers these pathways to the nervous system of the brain. So we have what's called the central nervous system in the brain, and then we have the enteric nervous system, or the GI nervous system. And then there's a connection between the vagus nerve, which is a very important cranial nerve, and research has even shown that patients who have their vagus nerve cut, as it sends signals up to the brain, that when we do a procedure for ulcers, that patients have a lower risk of actually developing Parkinson. So we actually believe that these abnormal proteins in our gut have a pathway from the vagus nerve to the brain. So early gut symptoms, severe constipation and other GI issues in Parkinson's, such as bloating, they can actually develop well before we develop tremors. And that could be, again, a signaling between the link between the gut and the brain. The other influence is also the microbiome. So there's been the papers by the NIH that have observed the differences in gut bacteria, also known as dysbiosis, in patients with Parkinson's. And some of the gut bacteria producing proteins may trigger alpha-synuclein to spread and misfold. So again, it's an abnormal protein when it's changed and triggered, and then it becomes toxic for our nervous system, whether it's our gut nervous system, and then it works its way up to the brain. The other aspect of the gut-brain axis is the autoimmune response. So some studies have also suggested that an immune reaction in the gut creates the alpha-synuclein to damage neurons, and then that leads to the disease state.
And for those hearing this for the first time, how could a disease that affects movement begin in the digestive tract?
So it's really important because the brain controls a lot of factors, and all signals, whether we sense them or if we move them, comes from the brain. So the nervous system, again, is connected by the central nervous system. We call it the peripheral nervous system of the fingers and the feet, but then also there's a connection of the enteric nervous system, right? So the enteric nervous system is what is the nerves around the GI system. And as I commented, there is this communication that occurs between the brain in the deep structures of the brainstem. And the key aspects of these movements, again, start with how does the gut even move? So our brain sends also signals when we're tired, it may send signals to the gut to slow down. when we're active, maybe it speeds certain things up. So there's always this connection, but the gut-brain axis is very much connected by inflammation. So there's inflammation in the gut, there could be inflammation in the brain. If there's inflammation in the brain, there could be inflammation in the gut. So signals work back and forth. We call it the efferent or afferent pathways. There's pathways that again sense and then signal. And so again, for instance, like if I went for a buffet dinner and I ate too much and I'm just stuffed and bloated, I feel sleepy and tired. So why do I feel sleepy in my brain? Because my gut felt bloated, is having to work over time. And then we see that there's a lot of continuum between our coordination centers. Now, when we have, we're normal and healthy and we're young, we can still coordinate if we're sleepy and tired. But when you have Parkinson's and your certain areas of the brain are already not coordinating well and our balance centers aren't as good, then we start seeing that the GI system, when it's bloated or slowed down, we don't think as well, we don't coordinate as well. And so we're a little bit more vulnerable in those situations. So any disease can cause nerve damage, and that can affect normal movement of the digestion. So even key factors, for instance, people who have diabetes, they have an autoimmune response that damages the vagus nerve. And that again causes slowness of the gut muscles, disrupts the normal motility. Autoimmune disorders, which we think even Parkinson's is in some way an autoimmune response, could be that there's misfolded proteins that then trigger inflammation and then kills neurons. And so that's part of the story. And then there's even more confusion about this disease state because there's other cells that are involved, pacemaker cells that we call them. They're those that regulate signals from the gut to the brain. These pacemaker cells may be damaged, and they're very specialized cells that are then in the gut wall, and they prevent normal coordinated contractions. They create slowed emptying. We call it gastroparesis. And this is what a lot of GI specialists have to focus on. But with Parkinson's, we see that very early in the disease and also very advanced disease states. So sometimes it's hard to differentiate if the constipation or slowed gut is from Parkinson's or other inflammatory disorders. Now, we also want to make sure that the thyroid's functioning well, and we also want to get blood tests and make sure everything's stable. But there are numerous other factors that aggravate the nervous system to not function well or signal well, which then signals to our brain.
Wow. It's interesting how when your digestive is sluggish, then you feel sluggish. You don't have a lot of energy to go about your day. But I hadn't thought about it, how it would affect Parkinson's patients or how they might have to take care of that even more so, to eat and reduce inflammation, I'm guessing, so that they avoid feeling slower because of the inflammation in their gut.
Yeah. A lot of patients they feel foggy in their brain as well. And, a lot of our patients end up having, when their constipation is relieved, they feel like more enlightened, more alert. And even patients say when they have had a bowel movement, they feel lighter, they feel better, they feel more coordinated. But that's, again, the GI system being connected to the brain. And you really need everything to function well. That's why in many of our previous episodes, we've talked about being vegetarian or having a high fiber diet and drinking a lot of water, because it really is important about the GI system to work well.
And many patients experience constipation or GI symptoms years before, right? How do you think about these early signals in your own practice?
So, as you asked, that patients may feel these symptoms years before, like decades before, 10 or even 20 years before, patients can get constipation. But I think about first the most common gastrointestinal symptoms in Parkinson's being constipation. Obviously, they're frequent. It can be quite severe. Patients can get very bloated. They can also get other GI issues of feeling severe nausea. And it's to the point where it's very intractable nausea. It's rare, but it does occur. And it's not even from medicine. Then other patients can also get GI-related issues such as drooling or excessive saliva. And again, the mouth is still part of the GI system. The esophagus is part of the GI system. The hiatal region between the esophagus to the stomach is part of the GI system. Some people get even hiatal hernias, and we see a higher rate of such symptoms. So we look at the whole gastric system. as the disease progresses with Parkinson, maybe there is worsening of or slow coordination of the small intestine and large intestine. And really in more advanced stages, we may see that patients are having issues with maybe absorption of normal nutrients or even medications. But we also see sometimes there's fecal incontinence, or we can't control our bowels or bladder, and that happens much more in the advanced stages. But I think what's common is bloating, abdominal discomfort after certain foods, and that may tell us that it's more than just motility. It could be bacteria or the biomes in our GI system that's also compromised.
These symptoms happen because it is a movement disorder, so it affects the movement within the intestine and the digestive system, but also might be related to microbiome.
Definitely. And I know you have, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about that as well. But yeah, slowed movement. And as we commonly talk with our patients, it's like it's a chicken or the egg phenomenon. Like, are we slow in our GI system because that slowness is part of the rigidity of the muscles? Is it a signaling issue? Or do these signals already in the enteric nervous system be slow? Are they slowed? And then they're creating a disruption in how other pathways should be signaling back and forth to the brain. So it's still an unknown phenomenon as to what came first, but we do know that there is this gut-brain axis and this intermixed as far as coordination.
So what is the role of the vagus nerve in connecting the gut and the brain? And
Yes.
what does it mean for how Parkinson's might spread?
Yeah, so that vagus nerve, VAGUS, not like Las Vegas, but that vagus nerve is the primary physical superhighway that communicates the gut to the brain. Okay. And so it's the 10th cranial nerve. There's 12 cranial nerves that come out from the brainstem, and a majority come to the face. But that cranial nerve, that's the vagus nerve, is a core component of the autonomic nervous system. So things that work automatically or without having to think about it, it just does what it's supposed to do. When you eat something, it's ready to fire. And it's supposed to work. When you're running, it's supposed to relax, and then you're supposed to have signals going to your arms and legs so you can run. So you're not supposed to be digesting food when you're moving, right? So the vagus nerve should work automatically. It facilitates that constant bidirectional communication between that central nervous system of the brain and spinal cord to the stomach. So when that's disrupted, it may not function well, and people can have indigestion, bloating when they're not supposed to. But let's go back into it. As I commented, it's a bidirectional highway. So it sends signals back and forth. The problem, though, with the vagus nerve is when it's disrupted, it can cause gut inflammation. It could also affect the gut microbiome. So the actual bacteria in the gut isn't functioning well. That's the good bacteria. They can also create an immune response for digestion. It could make your heart rate slower. It could affect even mood. So the vagus nerve has a lot of functioning, and it also helps with immune and neuroendocrine regulation, which means that how we modulate your endocrine response for maintaining good gut health is very important. How you may sweat after eating, or if you're in a state of fatigue, that neuroendocrine response can be varied because of the vagus nerve. And the highway transport system is those abnormal proteins of alpha-synuclein that we find on autopsy in the brain in Parkinson's patients actually are starting in the gut. And that vagus nerve is, again, the pathway at which these abnormal proteins misfold and then aggregate into clumps. And then these Lewy body clumps of them, they spread through the vagus nerve.
So when we speak of the gut-brain connection, is the vagus nerve that we're really talking about?
Yeah, it's one of the pathways that basically, when we have this leaky gut phenomenon and the gut's not functioning well, abnormal proteins are spreading, toxins could be spreading, inflammation is spreading, and then it's going through the vagus nerve that we believe, or into the bloodstream and other pathways that then eventually get to the brain.
So we've also seen studies showing alpha-synuclein proteins misfoldings in the gut. Can you explain what that means and how it may lead to Parkinson's pathology?
Definitely. So if we're making one connection, I want to make sure that I address this before I go into the details of the alpha-synuclein. But the vagus nerve, when we've actually even cut it, and it doesn't let these alpha-synuclein proteins go from the gut to the brain, we see less symptoms of Parkinson's. In fact, we see almost sometimes if we cut like the right vagus nerve, you may not see transmission to the right brain, and then the left side's not actually affected. And we've seen this even in animal models, that when we have injected misfolded alpha-synuclein into the gut of the mice, that it usually would result in the spread of the pathology from the brain or like to the brain. We can actually prevent that spread by severing the vagus nerve. So it is definitely a transmission or a pathway. Now, when we think about alpha-synuclein, it is again a normal protein in neurons. And the way it works first and foremost is it's misfolded and then it becomes abnormal. And that's when we believe that the hypothesis of Parkinson's is that abnormal misfolded protein is what's spreading. So typically the disease is from the gut. It's misfolded proteins that we can't excrete properly. We don't know what's causing the change or transformation into an abnormal protein. And these clumps is hard to get rid of. Then it kills other cells as it's transmitted, and it's spread in what we call a prion phenomenon. So mad cow disease, for instance, is a proteinopathy. It's an abnormal protein that we can't get rid of, and it quickly spreads to other neurons, and then it goes to the brain, where Parkinson's is thought to be a slow form of prion disease where these abnormal proteins are spreading. So the normal function, again, of the alpha-synuclein, it is a normal protein, and it's abundant in healthy neurons, and it helps with signaling. We call it presynaptic signaling. So I know I may be talking fast, and I may be trying to educate everyone here, but it is really important that the presynaptic is the signaling to one nerve and into another nerve, that it becomes postsynaptic. But the alpha-synuclein neurons help regulate, release natural neurotransmitters. It helps release dopamine. It helps release the signals of serotonin and norepinephrine and acetylcholine. So actually, alpha-synuclein, when it's normally functioning, it allows for essential vital signaling. But when it's abnormal and now it's clumped and it doesn't know how to propagate properly, or it breaks down in a form that is kind of again, I would say in an irritated state, it irritates then other signals, and then it doesn't allow for normal transmission. So we then see that these abnormal proteins don't know how to be broken down. So then the nerve itself may degenerate. And then on top of it, these misfolded alpha-synuclein, they seed into nearby healthy neurons. That we also don't know why they do that, but that's what they create into what's called Lewy bodies. And so we call it a cell-to-cell spread. And that's what Stanley Prusiner, a neurologist back in the day, had in the 1960s actually had stated that this is Parkinson's, for instance, is a prion disease.
So I just want to go back to the vagus nerve for a second. When you severe it for ulcer treatment,
so what happens is people who have severe ulcers, and so there's actual surgeons and GI specialists, they sever it, they cut it.
Okay, so when you sever the vagus nerve, you prevent the protein from spreading, but that's a secondary effect from a different treatment, from treating ulcers. But do you see that in the future being a way of preventing Parkinson's disease, or the cost is too high in terms of the function of the vagus nerve in other systems?
It's a great question. I'm glad that you're thinking about this. So I cannot use that as a standard of care, and we'll talk about that. But as of right now, we cannot say that we need to cut the vagus nerve, and I wouldn't recommend anyone going out to the GI specialist or a surgeon and asking for the vagus nerve to be cut. We can't say that by cutting the vagus nerve or severing in any way at this moment in time that we could slow down the disease. But maybe we'll get to even talking about the future options, but there could be some other forms of altering the vagus nerve that could maybe slow down the propagation of it.
That's really interesting. And let's talk a little bit about the microbiome. we've touched it lightly, but let's go a little bit deeper. How might gut bacteria influence inflammation, brain signaling, or even dopamine regulation?
Yeah, this could be its own episode. The microbiome, there's a lot to be learned about it. I get questions about this on a regular. And again, the gut bacteria influences all forms of signaling. It influences inflammation, brain signaling, dopamine production. There's actual dopamine producing metabolites called short chain fatty acids and other forms of neuroactive compounds that we use to make our neurotransmitters in our brain. And so we need to have them cross the blood-brain barrier and signal through the vagus nerve. So again, there is a lot of importance of how the microbiome environment is. It needs to be in a way as healthy as possible so we can also help our immune system. It's important for hormone balance and other pathways that modulate mood, cognition. And again, of course, I'm always looking at how it affects dopamine levels. So if there's an imbalance in the microbiome, we call it dysbiosis, dysbiosis, dysbiosis. And that's disrupted. It irritates the gut bacteria. It affects the gut barrier that we would have that opens up the floodgates, and it leads to systemic inflammation. And so we know that if we alter the gut biome, it alters the brain chemistry, and that influences things like depression and anxiety, even autism. So that inflammation, again, can be quite significant based on the gut biome. And if we look at, again, how the good bacteria in our gut work and function, they can produce lipopolysaccharides, they can produce short-chain fatty acids, and all of these help with activating signals of the immune system. They can cause inflammation in a good way or a bad way. And so we need to really make sure that we understand how to keep the gut healthy. So we are still not yet aware of which is the right prebiotics or probiotics that we need for our gut. We need to still do a lot more research. There's many companies that are functioning on actual looking at stool samples and in understanding what enzymes are high or low and what's an association to one's Parkinson's and to other disorders as well. That may be associated with cancers. It may be associated with Crohn's disease. So there's still a lot, but if we can keep the gut barrier integrity and we have a healthy gut microbiome, then we know that the brain will be healthier. And I've seen even patients who've had a lot of inflammation due to neurosarcoidosis, from diabetes. And when we reinstate a healthy gut microbiome, then all of a sudden their GI system works better. They're more active. Even their absorption to normal minerals is far better. So we see that it's so important to have that healthy gut to allow for better brain signaling, neurotransmitter production, and then again, maybe even the vagus nerve can function more stably.
Wow, it's really safe to say that if we take care of our gut, we will probably be preventing a lot of damage to the body in general. I know we still don't know how it affects and how to specifically prevent movement disorders by taking care of our gut, but we know that if our gut is healthy, then we're healthier.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting because like some people are very anxious, and then when they're anxious, they produce a lot of acidic gut lining, right? Like they get ulcers. They're not sleeping well. They have indigestion. So we see that like how our mind thinks affects our GI system. But what happens if we are healthy and we don't have any depression or anxiety, but then we irritate the gut and we create that secondary anxiety because our gut has been disrupted? I mean, we can see so many changes, but that may mean we can also maybe help other disease states or other mental health issues by taking care of the gut. And I do believe, and that's why it's so important to be exercising and eating healthy, because even exercise restores natural gut motility.
And as you mentioned, it's a two-way street. So I'm guessing if you take care of this managing stress, then your gut will be in a healthier state and vice versa, right? Your mind will probably function better as well.
Definitely.
So Could we one day diagnose Parkinson's before symptoms begin just by testing the gut? I know you said they're already testing stools and whatnot, but what do you think?
Yeah, I think one day it may be possible to diagnose Parkinson's disease well before you get any motor symptoms just by testing gut bacteria. Maybe, again, certain blood tests are going to be available in the next year or two. But there is this philosophy that extensive research is supporting the gut first hypothesis, and that may help well before you actually even get any tremulousness. It may even be able to use as diagnostic patterns 10 years before one is even close to getting any motor symptoms. So we do believe that there's going to be biomarkers that are going to identify from the gut how this neuroclumping of the alpha-synuclein is there as the hallmark of Parkinson's. It may also then be useful to see how our medical management in the future is working. If we're giving a new type of therapy, does it slow down the propagation of alpha-synuclein, or is it less alpha-synuclein in the GI system so that maybe we don't have a faster progressive type of Parkinson's? There's ultra-sensitive techniques that are called seed amplification assays, SAA, and they've been successfully detecting pathology of the alpha-synuclein that's in the gut. They're looking at the duodenum and the colon, and they're seeing also the stool samples that we have. They're presenting with pretty high accuracy in research settings right now for diagnosis. And again, if someone is having constipation well before motor symptoms, if someone is in their 40s or 50s getting constipation, maybe we can start doing these special assays that can then give us an understanding of how much alpha-synuclein is in the system, and it puts maybe at patients in a stratification of how likely they're going to develop Parkinson's. So I think that's going to be important. The other future implications is going to be how reliable these non-invasive diagnostics are for Parkinson's, and then we can not only have a risk factor for a patient, then we can even start preventative therapies. So maybe if we can stimulate the vagus nerve in a way, or reduce the signaling that may then transport the alpha-synuclein, we could even prevent the disease from progressing to the brain.
Do you see that being close? Like, are we close to getting there?
I think we're getting closer than ever before, and I think that there's a huge initiative by our health system, by the Fox Foundation, looking into biomarkers. So I do believe that we're going to get a blood test for Parkinson's in the next year or two. We're also going to get these assays probably in the next 3 to 5 years, and that way we'll be able to get a better diagnosis. I don't know how likely it's going to be able to tell us a 10-year predictive risk factor, but maybe within the early symptoms of tremors or slowness of coordination, maybe we could get that early detection.
And I know you've mentioned a little bit about not knowing which prebiotics or probiotics help with this, but are researchers exploring whether diet probiotics or anti-inflammatory therapies might actually slow or prevent the disease progression?
Yeah, I don't want to necessarily mention any specific type of probiotics or prebiotics because there's not one company that's better than the other. We still just don't know. I think it's going to be very particular, like concierge type of care of medicine, like individualized, checking one's stool samples or checking, again, the gut biome, and then seeing what levels are elevated and which ones are abnormal. So if we can get, again, more information, now it's going to be helpful. But I do believe right now that, and I am seeing it, that researchers are actively exploring how diet, as far as anti-inflammatory foods, whole grains, omega-3s, the probiotics, how it affects the gut bacteria, how we are targeting the anti-inflammation in the gut, that's going to slow down and maybe prevent the disease state of Parkinson's, but also Alzheimer's. I think it's going to help affect Crohn's disease and other gastrointestinal disorders that are inflammatory, that are, again, vicious. They cause hardening of the lining of the gut, and that creates that leaky gut phenomenon. There's a lot of people who have celiac disease that I think that changes in diet well before someone actually even has such issues are going to be resolving such advancing GI disease. But I do believe that the research is very diet microbiome related. And right now, I would explain to as many of our patients that come into our clinic, and even if you're a family member of the patient, or if you're just, a young kid, start with whole foods, diet rich in fruits and veggies. Really, we've talked about that. If we can have a low inflammatory diet, we're going to see less of a disease state, but fermented foods can help the microbiome diversity. We can also see omega-3s help the body's inflammatory response, and cut out the processed sugars. I mean, processed food is toxic. I know there's a lot of legislation going on to get rid of such of our abnormal preservatives. But if you go to like Canada, you'll see like for cereal, there's only like 3 ingredients. But if you come to the US, that same cereal will have 17 different types of ingredients, and more than, 75% of them, all these processed types of additives. And so I think that we're doing this to ourselves, and I'm hoping that we have more information to realize how to help our future.
I find this really exciting, and I feel like more and more are doctors speaking of this. But I also know we're in the early stages of understanding. As a clinician, how do you balance excitement about the gut-brain research with what we can actually act on today?
Yeah, so I think, look, I'm here doing these podcasts because I just want to spread hope and education and realistic information. There's a lot to be learned, and I'm sure we're going to have to make some adjustments to these videos, or maybe add on another video a year from now about more about the gut research. And I think that the perspective again is we have something that's disease modifying. Start early, change your perspectives of the disease state. Neural health is from the gut health, and everything's interconnected. How you take care of your skin, how you take care of your teeth. We see that everything's connected to the brain. There's data that suggests Alzheimer's could be related to those who have poor dental health hygiene. So there is so much in our oral bacteria in our mouth that has been changed and modified that could lead to, again, dementia. So I think that the excitement is there because there's a real connection. I think with something like Parkinson's, where we have a awareness of abnormal proteins that are spreading, so it's a certain pathway, it may help certain patients with Parkinson's. This may not be the only route that we may be able to help patients, because there may be other genetics that are involved in Parkinson's, but this may be how the environmental toxins that we're exposed to through our food or through pesticides may be one of the explanations of why 85% of Parkinson's patients have environmental reasons, and it's not genetics. So the excitement is there, it's real, and I can't wait to share more about that information that we find. But there is going to be some way of disease modifying agents, early detection, and we got to start now. It's real simple. We got to start with our kids. We got to start with our young adults, and we definitely got to start with our patients to change the mindset of how important and motivating it is to eat healthy.
That's amazing. Thank you for that, because I do think that people need to hear it, and it's something that it is under our control. I know the food industry is disgusting and we can't change that, but we can definitely make better choices for ourselves and our families.
Definitely.
And for patients listening who are dealing with both motor symptoms and GI issues, what kind of conversations should they be having with their neurologist?
Yeah, so it's our job as neurologists to stay in our lane, know what we know. But I also depend very much on our GI counterparts and the GI specialists that we work with. Have them maybe do an endoscopy or colonoscopy, make sure that we're not dealing with any underlying other issues. There is a lot of factors such as SIBO that may exist. This is the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. There's other bacteria that can be in the gut that's abnormal growth. We see the use of antibiotics overused, and then that kills our good, healthy gut. That then kills our good gut microbiome. And then we see this again, changes of inflammation in our system. So it is so important that we make sure we do our regular checkups with our primary care doctors, get our routine labs. But again, with Parkinson's, when you start having constipation, bloating, indigestion, we feel fatigued or slow, this is where we need our GI specialist to get an opinion. And then maybe we need to, again, change our diet first, make sure we're also addressing the common features of Parkinson's besides constipation. Patients with Parkinson's have a higher rate of hiatal hernias. That's why it's so important to get an endoscopy, because that can also affect how we sleep. We need to make sure that our gut is healthy, and making sure that there's not any blood in our stools. We got to, again, get our colonoscopies, make sure they're not risk for any other cancers. And I think, again, it's just totalitarian. We got to work together to make sure the whole system functions well, because the brain sends signals everywhere, and we need to work efficiently, that's for sure.
Dr. Thakkar, we've reached the end of our episode, so thank you so much for helping us better understand the science and the promise behind the gut-brain connection in Parkinson's. For listeners, this is a powerful reminder that your health is a whole body story. What's happening in your gut may be telling us something long before the first tremor appears. If this episode helped you see Parkinson's in a new way, please subscribe, share, or leave a review. We'll see you next time. And until then, take care of your body, your brain, and your microbiome too.